Hello and welcome back to Toy Thursday with Johnny Tiger on January 27th, 2022. Continuing our episode of Grandpa's Last Throwdown, and this episode we have yet another grandfatherly figure that, yes, he is really old, but he definitely throws down and in some really big way. Like several of our previously mentioned grandpas in this long-running action figure character reveal, this old codger is most likely one of the most powerful characters in the universe in which he finds himself. Even though there have been many parts of the story where he's a little bit on the underwhelming side, and so it was confusing as a reader to find out that he is that powerful, and just kind of make you wonder why he is so underpowered for most of the story. But that we'll get into a little bit later in this episode, and there is an answer, at least from my personal observations and research and maturing as a fantasy reader. I'll give you my take on the scenario, and whether you agree or disagree, or maybe you have some other information that can back up my claim or disprove it, you can let me know. Of course, right now we're looking at a pointy wizard's hat, and some of you might be thinking, are we doing Harry Potter? Is this a wizard's hat from the Harry Potter book? No, not quite. Close. Uh, it's a character from not just one book, but a series of books, and a character that most of you, if you are familiar with The Lord of the Rings, or The Hobbit, or anything by J.R.R. Tolkien, should be very familiar with. Yes, despite my personal trepidation and reluctant to do this episode, we are going to take a look at Gandalf the Grey. So who is Gandalf the Grey? Well, if I want to take you down the path of the Lord of the Ring and the Hobbit, then we are going to be here all night long. So I'm going to give you guys a more abbreviated and comprehensive version of his biography, because the way he was written in the book, you kind of find out a little bit here, a little bit there, and for the most part, he's this very mysterious person. Of course, in the beginning of The Hobbit and the beginning of The Lord of the Ring, we know that Gandalf is this old wizard with gray hair, gray beard, wearing a gray cloak. Yeah, you know why they call him Gandalf the Grey? Because he likes to dress in gray. Well, that's actually not why, but anyway. Uh, he dressed in gray, and he always show up at the home of our main character, the hobbits, these little cute little people that are like smaller than dwarfs and very peaceful folk. Uh, every time in the middle of the summer, they would have a midsummer festival, and then during this festival, Gandalf, the traveling wizard, would show up and with a lot of gifts and firework and things to amaze the Hobbit with. So you can from here we can see that Gandalf sort of takes on a little bit of a uh, similarity to what amount to a Santa Claus, Saint Nick in the Lord of the Ring universe. But so far, we don't know much about him. And in fact, we have to keep traveling with the companions and go through their adventures and eventually learn more and more about Gandalf, even to the end of the book. If you only read one of those books, if you only read Fellowship of the Ring, or if you only read The Hobbit, you still might be kind of confused as to exactly what is Gandalf's deal. Like, he seemed to be this old guy who knows an awful lot about everything, and, and he seems to have some magical power, but for the most part, he is very cryptic. He's very evasive. He's clearly one of the good guys, but he doesn't seem to be helping as much as he should. So what's going on here? Like he always managed to put our main characters in danger, and once in a while, if they're in real trouble, Gandalf might bail them out of trouble. But a lot of time, he's going to do this thing where he said, "I can see that you need to go here, you need to go to this very dangerous place, but you know what? I can't go with you, so and I'm not going to tell you why. So yeah, off with you. Go on, go, don't get yourself killed. I'll see you later." Kind of thing. Like, what the heck? So like I said, if I try to lead you down the chronological order of the books, then we're going to be here all night and might still not get fully into who Gandalf really is. So let me give you this abbreviated version to Gandalf's true identity. Before I start, let me quickly say that any year I give, dates and stuff like that, is strictly fictitious. These are dates from J.R.R. Tolkien's books from the Lord of the Rings timeline. So if I say year 2020, that's not our year 2020. Okay? So uh, in the beginning of time, God in Tolkien's book created a bunch of servants. You can say that they're lesser gods, they're like angels, they're called mayors. Uh, and somewhere at around year 1100 or year 1000, and around there, God realized that there was a dark lord. There was a dark lord that's trying to take over the human world, aka the Middle Earth. So that's what the our world is called in the Lord of the Rings, called Middle Earth. So God realized that Middle Earth is in trouble. There's a Dark Lord. He's very powerful. He's like one of the fallen angels. So there's kind of like a biblical reference here. So one of the fallen angels is trying to take over the world. Okay, great. God cannot interfere himself, so he sent five of the most powerful mayors down to the human world to guide and advise those who would stand against the coming darkness. Now, this is very important. Okay, this part of the story is very important. There's little details. God sent them down to guide and advise human. So we're going to come back to this later, but for now, just remember that this part is very important. Um, so as far as we know, Gandalf has been there since the beginning of time. The first date that was mentioned was when the Dark Lord first started to try to subvert human society in the guise of a necromancer. Gandalf was there to stop his activities at around year 1100. And then there's a lot of other little conflicts and battles, and Gandalf and his four other uh, fellow angels, they basically, when they came to the mortal world, they got turned into human forms, and they look like old men, like uh, with different color cloak, different color robes. Gandalf was gray. So if you want, just think of how in the TV series like Power Ranger or Ninja Turtle, how you have a bunch of good guys and they're only distinguished by the color of their turban or the color of their helmet. Okay, so the five angels that came down to guide humanity, they were like that. They were all old men. That they appear like old men, and they just kind of like wear different colors. Gandalf happened to be the color gray. So fast forward from year 1100, the next time the Dark Lord started to stir and looked like he was going to wake up from his slumber and take over the world. was all the way toward 2941. That's when the Hobbit storyline took place, when uh, Gandalf had to put together this little team of adventurers, dwarves, and hobbits, and set them out on a mission to get them to kill a dragon, to save the world, and so on and so on. Anyway, those of you who watch The Hobbit, you know what I'm talking about. Those of you that don't know The Hobbit, I don't want to bore you with an overly long explanation. Okay, if you have not watched it, obviously you're not interested. So anyway, so that's what happened in around 2941. So we can already surmise that by the time of the Hobbit storyline, Gandalf is over 1,000 years old. And in that movie, in the Hobbit movie, in the Hobbit book, he definitely doesn't look like someone who's 1,000 years old. He still looks like a regular old guy who's very active, very physically active, and uh, he saved them from he saved the companions from being eaten by a bunch of trolls and being captured by goblins and stuff like that. And then we fast forward again. Next time the Dark Lord, actually this time the Dark Lord is back. Then it's building an army to take over the world for good. Was year 3001, which was the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, the Lord of the Ring storyline. So by this point, Gandalf is almost 2,000 years old. So no matter how we slice it, he's old. He's really, really old. A lot older than he looks. Um, Now, why is Gandalf such a powerhouse? Why is he qualified to be in this episode? Well, beyond his obvious senior advanced age. Well, as we said, Gandalf is not actually human. He's like an angel who's sent here to guide and advise human beings. So he has powers that other humans, other people don't. And he has survived many, many things that other people wouldn't have survived. In addition to being extremely wise and have all the knowledge of the ancients and angelic people, he has also learned a great deal about things other than magic. He's a great magician, great wizard. He can communicate with animals. He's very, very good at dealing with human politics, knowing where the trouble is going to start and how to solve a lot of the political conflict. Uh, he is also very independent, doesn't really bind himself to any one faction or emperor or king. He's this wise old man who come and go as he wishes, and if you don't like it, too bad. Uh, he is also a great horseman. He rides a beautiful horse in Lord of the Rings called Shadowfax. Unfortunately, I never did acquire a copy of that action figure. So if any of you want to give me a Shadowfax and Gandalf deluxe set, which was made by ToyBiz in 2003, I thank you in advance, but I imagine it's very difficult to find that set right now. Anyway, I did, however, acquire one of the Gandalf action figures, which we'll be taking a look at today. Just like the character is supposed to represent, this action figure of Gandalf is showing its age. This was made by ToyBiz in around 2003, 2004, in the Fellowship of the Ring wave of the Lord of the Rings series of action figures. Honestly, I still think some of those Lord of the Ring action figures made by ToyBiz in the early 2000s were some of the best action figures ever made, especially in the fantasy genre. The actor who played Gandalf in Lord of the Rings was Ian McKellen, and supposedly the likeness is pretty good on this action figure. Although, how can you tell with that long hair and that big beard he's sporting? I don't know. Anyway, this Gandalf is quite imposing. This is when he's still Gandalf the Grey. Yet later in the story, I guess because it's a really old story, I don't have to worry about spoilers. But later in the story, he did turn to Gandalf the White. Now that is a lot more than just a color swap. That's a lot more than just a color change. Apparently, when you change from gray to white, it's like going up a rank in the uh, in angel status. So when he was Gandalf the Grey, he was nowhere as powerful as when he became Gandalf the White. Uh, the way we were led to understand the story is when you uh, go from gray to white, it unlocks more of your angelic power, and so you're able to do a lot more impressive things than before. Anyway, since this is not Gandalf the White, this is still Gandalf the Grey we are looking at. We're just trying to stick with Gandalf the Grey for now. Uh, it's a very imposing action figure. This is him in his pointy wizard hat, uh, bellowing wizard's robe and cloak, and he's holding a wizard's staff in his right hand, and on his hip, he's carrying a very long and impressive looking sword. Like I said, Gandalf is not one of those wizards who's only good at doing magic. When he wants to get his hand dirty, when he has to get rough, he can actually be quite a deadly swordsman as well. Um, Now, I will say that this staff in his hand is not the original that he came with because I've had this action figure since 2003, 2004. Uh, his staff has gone missing during one of my house moving sessions. So, luckily, I do have uh, a spare staff in my big collection of action figure spare weapons and parts. So I put this in his hand. It fits really well. It doesn't look like the kind of staff he used on screen, but hey, at least he's not empty-handed. There were quite a few Gandalf action figure released by ToyBiz. One of them has ability to light up his magical staff, and there's another one that depict him in a Gandalf the White outfit. This one is the most generic, the most basic. I did not acquire any of the other one because for me, I don't like duplicates of a character in my collection, even if they are wearing different outfits. So I try to avoid that as much as possible. Uh, I had the one Gandalf, and the way he's always portrayed. That's good enough for me. I don't need another one. I don't care if he's wearing white or gray. Still Gandalf to me. Um, but this is a very good portrayal of him. It's very well articulated. Of course, nowhere as well articulated as the action figures today. And his head movement do get restricted by his long hair and his long beard. But his arms can move freely, shoulder, elbow, wrist. Uh, his cloak and his robes are all made of a soft PVC material, so they do not restrict his movement. Honestly, this is something that I think a lot of action figure makers today should study up on and learn from because even back in early 2000s, ToyBiz already knew how to make action figures that wear a lot of clothes without the clothes restricting their movement. Something that is a constant problematic thing today with Todd McFarlane and Hasbro and NECA. So often we have a good action figure, but because they're wearing a skirt or a dress or a cloak or a robe, they can't move because the material is too stiff. The pointy wizard hat, as you can see, is removable, so you can have a hatless Gandalf if you wish. You can really appreciate the sculpt on his long hair and his beard. Like I said, the long hair and beard do really restrict the head movement, but that is really unavoidable by uh, any means because of the nature of the plastic and the materials used. Now, I have seen Japanese import figures circumvent this issue by having articulation built into their hair and their beard so you can move them out of the way and reposition them. But those are usually $100 figures we're talking about that can do that. Not only is his staff and his hat removable, uh, you can also take his sword out of the sheath and have him hold it in his hand if you want Gandalf to uh, get rough with some enemy in close quarter combat. Unfortunately, I will say the sword. I don't know if it looked this way on screen or not, but the sword for this action figure is one of the more silly sword I've seen. Because Gandalf is like one of the most powerful characters in his world. He's here holding a sword that is shaped basically like those cheap $20 Tai Chi sword that you see that the old Chinese guys swinging around in the park. Like this sword really is uh, kind of underwhelming, and I don't think you can see it on camera. But if you look at the tip of the sword, it doesn't even finish in a point like how a sword's supposed to be. Like the tip is blunted off like one of those training swords. So I don't know what the heck is with the deal with this sword. It's very uh, uh, generic, very cheaply done. And so most of the time, I don't even display him with a sword in his hand. I just keep it in the sheath on his waist. And that also leads to one of my personal pet peeves. You see, this action figure is very well articulated, like I already mentioned, so much so that even his hands, his fingers are articulated. So his fingers can open and close, which sound like a good idea on paper, but because action figures don't have muscle strength to hold onto something with any kind of grip power. So when you put finger articulation in an action figure, that almost guarantees that they can't hold onto their weapon. Uh, Especially when action figure is almost 20 years old. His grip is going to be so loose that it's difficult to pose him without him dropping the weapon in his hand because the joints in his hand are so loose that almost useless by this point. Now, because this is like I said, very old action figure, so I'm not going to fiddle with his joints too much here. I mean, the joints are actually very well made. I have no fear of his joints breaking. However, these old Lord of the Ring figures do have another little problem that can hit them sometime, which is the material of their outer garment. His cloak and that skirt piece around his leg, those are very soft, almost like eraser feeling rubber. And back in the early 2000s, a lot of action figures were made with this kind of materials as part of their clothes. And almost without failing, 20 years later, a lot of these materials start to crack and flake away. So if you have action figures have this kind of rubbery PVC material on the outside, be very careful because these things sometimes do dry out, and when they dry out, just breathing on them is going to make them fall apart. And I really don't want to end up with a Gandalf without his cloak or his skirt piece. Calling it a skirt is kind of weird because he's a guy wearing a skirt, but that a lot of fantasy characters do uh, have that skirt thing uh, around their legs. So I guess yeah, skirt. Like I said, I don't want to chance these things breaking, so that's why I am not going to fiddle with him too much. But before we go, I want to quickly mention some of his deeds, some of the things he's done. Because so far, what I've talked about is his role in the story and his role as an angel that's sent to the human world. But I really haven't give you any concrete idea of why he deserved to be a grandpa that throws down. As I mentioned, he's a very, very good horseman. He's very, very good swordsman. He has some impressive magic trick. But if we have to look at deeds so far, without going through the entire J.R.R. Tolkien books, I will name a few. One is he managed to save his companions from three very large, very hungry stone trolls with nothing but his wisdom. He just basically used magic to cast his voice to make the trolls fight each other, and when the sun came up, it turned the trolls to stone. So he used his intelligence rather than expanding his energy to fight these giant brutes. And then, later, when his companions were captured by goblins, he had one of the more impressive showing in the cave, fighting the goblins with kind of a fiery explosion of magic. It was really impressive. Of course, that was kind of one of the first inkling that we have. It's like, okay, if he can do this, why didn't he do this before? Like, why he wait until now? And how come later in the story when there's more danger, how come he hasn't done more of that kind of explosive, fiery magic thing? What's going on here? Like I said, I'll talk about my theory near the end, close to the end of the video, why I think Gandalf wasn't always uh, the the one to solve the problem. So back to his deeds and his accomplishments. Uh, he has single-handedly in preventing the Dark Lord from taking over the world for thousands of years. Uh, During the Lord of the Ring, he single-handedly faced down and scared away not just one, four ring wraiths. Now, for those of you who don't know what ring wraiths are, those are nine undead warriors in Lord of the Rings. There's only nine of them, and they're extremely powerful. Like most mortal warriors, human, would run away in fear or crap their pants just at the sight of them, at the sight of a ring wraith. Most soldiers would run away, throw down their weapon, and run away. Ring wraiths were nearly indestructible. They pretty much couldn't be killed, uh, and they were when they were still human, they were all some of the best the world could offer. So ring wraiths were no joke. I mean, we look at them in the movies and stuff like that. We kind of see, well, they're just like headless horsemen. That they're scary, but after a while, you kind of get used to them. But the implied threat was since there's only nine of them, they're extremely powerful. Gandalf was able to face down four of them at the same time, and they had to retreat. Later, in the mines of Moria, of course, those of you know the story already know what's coming up. When the Fellowship, when the good guys went to the mines of Moria, and woke up the ancient evil called a Balrog. Gandalf stood on this bridge, like there's this bridge in the middle of the mines that only one person can cross at a time. Under the bridge is like really, really deep pit that so deep that it takes days to hit bottom if you fall off the bridge. Uh, the Balrog, this ancient demonic creature, is coming out behind them. So Gandalf told his companion, "Run, run for your life. I'll, 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 I'll hold the uh, Balrog here." So Gandalf, this old gray wizard, stood in the middle of the freaking bridge, waiting for this Balrog. And for those of you who don't know what a Balrog looks like, it's this basically demonic thing. Like imagine your typical looking demon, wings and horns and fire and very bad attitude, but about 12 feet tall. Okay, so here comes the Balrog, 12 feet tall, giant wings. The wings were so wide that it went from one uh, end of the cavern to the other end of the cavern. That his wingspan covered the entire cavern from side to side. And he got a fiery sword and a fiery whip in his hand, and he's coming to get the good guys because they woke him up. He's really pissed. And then he gets to the bridge, and there's this little human old wizard standing in the middle of the bridge. And Gandalf said probably the most famous quote in Lord of the Rings. He said, "You shall not pass." So here's 6 foot tall Gandalf looking up at the 12-foot tall Balrog and say, "You shall not pass." And basically, Balrog decided, "F you, yes, little man, I am going right over you." And Balrog stepped onto the bridge, and they started fighting, and both of them fell off the bridge. Uh, of course, most of us were uh, led to believe that that's the end of Gandalf. He sacrificed himself, falling off the bridge with the Balrog. As most of us, as those of us who watched the movie or read the book know, he came back as Gandalf the White. Basically, he did die. Don't get it wrong. A lot of people get confused and say, how come Gandalf can fall off that bridge and fall to the bottom of the mountain? How come the Balrog died and Gandalf didn't die? Gandalf did die at the end of the battle. Gandalf died, but remember the part where he was an angel sent down to the mortal world by God. So basically, he died, and God said, "Hey, you're not supposed to be back here. Your job's not done." So God sent him back again. But God decided that, you know what? I sent you down there as the gray angel. So, well, it wasn't called the gray angel, but I sent you down there with the color gray, and you got yourself killed. So you know what? I'm going to send you down there as a white this time, because the white angel was the most powerful. So you can be Gandalf the White this time, rather than Gandalf the Grey. So hopefully you'll do better this time. Don't get killed again. Um, so that's how he survived. That's how he came back from that battle. So it's not that he didn't die. He did die. God sent him back because his job wasn't done. Um, Later, a little bit later in the story, he faced down the Witch King of Angmar, which was the leader of those scary ass ring wraiths we talked about earlier. Uh, Now, in the movie, there's a director's cut scene where the Witch King actually kicked Gandalf's butt, uh, but I don't think that actually occurred in the story, in the book. So whether you want to take that or leave it, It's up to you. So all that shows us that Gandalf is basically one of the uh, most powerful beings in the entire run of the story. Later, when Frodo finally destroyed the One Ring and saved the world, it was Gandalf who went to rescue him on the back of great eagles and pluck him out of the volcano. Um, so a lot of the things that happened in the story wouldn't have been able to happen without Gandalf. So all this definitely qualifies him to be grandpa that throws down in my book. So here comes the $1 million question, the question that troubled me for a long time since I was a child, since I was a teenager and first tried to read The Lord of the Rings. Um, because it took me many, many tries before I finally could get through the book. Honestly, I said this before, I'm going to say it again. Not a very big fan of J.R.R. Tolkien's writing. His stories are great, but the way he tells his stories are really boring. I much prefer Conan the Barbarian, that kind of story. Uh, anyway, but that's just me. I'm very shallow. What can I say? Um, One of the questions that plagued me for a long time was, if Gandalf is that powerful, how come he didn't solve more problems? Like, how come he let the goblins chase him all over the darn place in the cave, in the Hobbit? How come he couldn't just destroy the trolls uh, when and have to try to trick them into fighting each other? How come he didn't just go and kill the dragon himself? If he could fight, like the guy literally went one-on-one against a Balrog, a 12-foot tall ancient demon. If he could do that, how come he didn't go and kill the dragon himself? How come he didn't take care of the Dark Lord, or that at least the Dark Lord's army? How come he got trapped in a friggin' tower by uh, Saruman, the other wizard, Saruman the White, in the beginning of the Lord of the Ring? How come? How come? How come? He's so powerful? How come he couldn't do more? And it wasn't until I grew up and started to read and research more and talk to more people about this that I came to a very simple, sensible conclusion. And like I said, whether you agree or disagree, and feel free to leave it in the comments. But it boiled down to Gandalf is not human. He's an angel. Now, some of you might say, well, what does that have to do with it? Doesn't that just mean he's more powerful? Well, yes, but angels play by a different set of rules than human beings. And apparently, in the world of the Lord of the Ring, in J.R.R. Tolkien's fantasy world, angels do not have free will. So what that means is, remember in the very beginning, I said his directive when God sent him down to the mortal world, his mission was to guide and advise humans on how to deal with the Dark Lord. Which means even if Gandalf could, which is debatable, but even if he could, he couldn't just go knock on the Dark Lord's door and then destroy him with a wave of his hand, even if he could. Because that's not his job. That's not what God sent him down here to do. And unlike human beings, he did not have enough free will to go against that kind of directive. Um, that is reason one. Reason two is Gandalf realized one thing is if he just solved everything, if he just solved every problem for human beings, for people on this earth, then the day he's no longer here, well, then they don't know how to do anything. So he probably decided somewhere along the line it's much better to be human beings and elves and dwarves would be their friends and show them how to get things done, help them come to conclusions rather than just rush in there like the all-powerful angelic being and railroad everything and force everything down everybody's throat. Because if he does that, then he's no different from the Dark Lord. Now, some people may say, well, that doesn't make sense. You know, if he has all that power, it doesn't make sense that he's holding back, and trying to do things the hard way. Uh, it doesn't matter if he's following, playing by a different rule or stuff like that. Well, think about this for a second. Police officers, they have guns, they have tasers, they have billy clubs, they have the law on their side. But can they actually knock on every door and try to do away with all the criminals in the world? They can't, because they have to play everything by legal procedure. They can't just go and knock on doors and shoot every criminal, everyone who they think is a criminal. Military, they have helicopters and tanks and a lot of weapons. But can they just go out of their way to punish all the bad people? How come if the look at how powerful the Marines, the SEAL teams, and all that, special forces, Rangers, how powerful those units are. How come they don't send them over to Colombia and get them to just gun down all the Colombia drug lords? Because you can't do things that way. Okay? So if we look at things from that point of view, then it totally makes sense that Gandalf couldn't just strong arm everything himself. He had to play by the rule that he was given by. Otherwise, the world would be in chaos. Agree or disagree? Let me know in the comment section. Hopefully, you are at least entertained by this episode. Next Toy Thursday, we'll look at Gandalf's counterpart, another very powerful old character from The Lord of the Rings.